computer. Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Marco Pellegrini. I'm associate professor at the University of Tokyo in the Nuclear Engineering Department. And I want to welcome all of you for this AirJ talk. But before we proceed with our speaker, I would like to give very few words about our association, since this is the first talk that we are sharing outside of our small community. So the Association of Italian Researchers in Japan, or AirJ, was born with the objective to connect Italian researchers living in Japan or living in Italy, connected anyway to Japan, and also in a deeper framework also to connect with Europe and the other European research organization. And it was born, as you can see here, at the end of 2019, and similar to COVID babies, we were deeply affected in our growth by the pandemic. So we have started making online events, and eventually we realized that there are some advantages of online events, that we have the possibility to include the researchers from all over the world. And this is why we have decided to continue this format, which is called AirJ Talk, with the speakers to everybody that is available to connect. If you want more information about our association, please visit their website or contact us here. You see the information. And so for today, I will be helped by Professor Giorgio Colombo, who will be the chairman. And so, Giorgio, please go ahead. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, everybody, for joining. My name is Giorgio Colombo, and I'm a professor at Nagoya University. I teach comparative law. My role today is basically just to introduce our speaker, Professor Andrea De Antoni, Kyoto University. He is a cultural anthropologist, and is the correct title is Program-Specific Associate Professor at Kyoto University. Now, we invited, well, the AirJ invited Andrea today because the overwhelming majority of members are into what they're called like the hard sciences and natural science, mathematical sciences. And they work and live in Japan, but many of them don't have a specific background in Japanese studies. And so one of the purposes of these talks is to provide them with information about Japanese society and culture, whatever that means. Andrea will engage that in painful detail today. Now, we gave Andrea an extremely difficult task, which is to give an introduction that should, as the term says, introductory enough to be understood by non-specialists, but at the same time, we invited a specialist. One of the problems about divulgation about Japan is that very often it's easy to indulge in stereotypes or in simplistic representation. This weekend, we had a conversation with Professor De Antoni commenting one book by Roger Spolvers, an author who lived in Japan for many years. And we agreed that the best sentence in the book was any and every sentence which starts with the Japanese is wrong. And we agree with that. Nevertheless, it's important to have these occasions for high quality introductory talks. And that's why we invited Andrea. So that's enough for my side. I think I already talked too much. I give the floor to Andrea, and I will be moderating the Q&A after his presentation. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello and welcome one and all to this lecture. I'm your host, Andrea De Antoni, for the moment. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And big hello to all the folks at Tokyo International University, because as far as I understand this, is being broadcasted as a class. So I guess that there are a bunch of students somewhere in Tokyo listening to me. So hi, folks. And so I'll try not to be too boring and to give an introductory talk. Hi, folks. Hello there. You're many. Thank you, Tom. And I will try not to be too boring and to give you some introductory notions about so-called Japanese religions or religiosity. Now, quite typically, as a specialist, as an anthropologist, and as a specialist in Japanese religion, quite typically people ask me, are the Japanese religion religious? And this question in itself is a little bit problematic because it implies certain notions of religion as opposed to spirituality or secularity, the secular. Certain notions and conceptualizations of the Japanese and an understanding of a certain kind of understanding of Japanese religions. Now, let's start with something that, generally speaking, startles a lot of people, which is statistics. First, statistics, numbers, because so I look like I know what I'm talking about. This is a survey that every year the Ministry of Cultural Affairs, I think, carries out about Japanese religions in Japan. And these are numbers. So the division here is Shinto related, Buddhism related, Christianity related, and others. Others, we will not talk about them. I won't talk about Christianity also because, as you can see, it's a pretty small minority for today. But the important thing, what I would like you to notice, is the overall number of affiliated people. Because here we have 181 million people overall. And maybe if you already made the connection, the general population of Japan is 125 million, which means that religious people in Japan are actually more than the actual population. Is this because the Japanese are extremely religious? No, it is generally because, first, religions in Japan do not, with the exception of Christianity and other small exceptions, do not require conversion. So there are multiple affiliations. And second, in many cases. And second, there are a little bit of issues with how these statistics and registrations are made, but let's not talk about it. Another very important point that actually goes against these high numbers is the low numbers of religious believers in Japan. Now, in Japan, there is this very famous saying, born Shinto, married Christian, and die Buddhist. That is a way to show how Japanese people are free to move from one religious context to another, and typically calendrical rituals that mark life stages in Japan tend to be Shinto. Buddhism manages death and funerals. More recently, like since the post-war in general, Christian marriage ceremonies have become quite mainstream. So this is why this is what this saying actually means. But at the same time, again, national surveys show that 72% of the people do not have any specific religious affiliation. Individuals do not feel affiliated to any specific religious institution. Only 26% believed in a religion, but 94% respected their ancestors. Now, why am I showing you such an old survey, even though these surveys are carried out every year? Because this is the only case in which, the only instance is the word I was looking for, in which there was one more question that was asked, and that became extremely famous internationally, especially in English-speaking newspapers. It was picked up by a lot of English newspapers in English language. 56% of the Japanese had some form of supernatural experience. This is how the survey was translated into English and how it was picked up by newspapers. So again, it contributes to the idea of these very spiritual people who have more than half had supernatural experiences. I mean, it's the super religious Japanese. Actually, if you take a look at the survey in Japanese, this is the original question, and it is Shizen no naka ni ningen no chikara o kueta nanika o kanjita koto ga aru ka. So, have you ever felt anything that goes beyond human strength in nature? And as you can guess, it's slightly different from supernatural. So, because in this case, quite obviously, even an earthquake or a tsunami would actually be a good example, right? So, whereas it doesn't necessarily go towards the supernatural. That being said, when I ask my students, I teach both in English and in Japanese here, and when I ask my students what they thought when they read this question, because I asked them during classes, many of them thought that it was referring to something supernatural. Many of them, like more than half of them. But still, we don't know how the people who took the survey understood the question, right? And nevertheless, this connected to this idea of the spiritual Japanese that is quite widespread internationally speaking. Indeed, up to some years ago, up to the 200,000, I would say, Japan has always often been taken as an example against so-called secularization theory, modernization and secularization theory, which postulates that with the going on of modernization, there is also, the scientific knowledge, education, and so on and so forth. The importance of religion goes down and down and down and down. Now, Ian Reader, who is like the specialist of Japanese religions in English-speaking countries, and he's a super famous person, actually wrote in one introductory book this: it is almost as if many Japanese would like to convey the impression that Japan is a wholly secular society in which religion has to all intents and purposes disappeared. In reality, Japanese people in general exhibit extremely high levels of religious activity and behavior, and Japanese society and culture are intricately interwoven with religious themes. So what is the problem here? People in Japan can easily be seen going to the shrine, going to Buddhist temples, and nevertheless, the majority of them say that they're not religious, and they represent Japanese society as strongly non-religious. So what's wrong? What's going wrong here? Are there issues with religion? Are there issues with belief? And actually, the answer is both. Because from an anthropological perspective, that is cross-cultural and as cross-cultural as possible, and with the intent of finding some general definitions of things, the very first attempt to define religion was carried out by anthropologist Victor Tyler in 1871, and he defined it the belief in spiritual beings. Now, we can go on forever to discuss this definition. I won't discuss it. I just want to point out that even the first definition of religion made the idea of belief extremely central. Now, time has passed, and he saw it as an attempt by human beings to make sense of their experience and of the world without scientific knowledge, of course. Now, time has passed, and there have been a ton of discussions up to 93, let's say 2003, when anthropologist Talal Asad pointed out these 2-3 important things here. First, that there can be no universal definition of religion because there is no essence in religion. Religion and the boundaries between what is religious and what is not changed over time, even within the same context. Obviously, they change throughout contexts. Second, the focus on belief is inherently modern, Western Christian. I would tend to say more Protestant than Catholic, but still modern Western Christian. The very attempt to define religion is inherently modern and Western, as it assumes the contrast with the secular and secularizations. Plus, we now know that even notions of secularization and secularizations are plural and differ from context to context. So this is one of the reasons why it's impossible to find a general universal definition for religion, okay? Sometimes this issue that can be seen as, a very academic, theoretical one, might have very practical issues. So it is important to understand how modernity has been constructed, formed in one specific context. In the case of Japan, we know that, for example, historically speaking, very, very quickly, Buddhism was introduced from Korea in the 6th century. We know that, we don't know the exact date. We know that there were diplomatic missions from Korea that introduced Buddhist images, statues, with them certain rituals and certain Buddhist texts. This foreign religion was considered by the Japanese aristocracy at the time possibly extremely powerful. And it got installed on a substrate of local cults worshipping local gods, kami. And it got mixed over time. So since the 6th century, let's say 7th century, to the modern period, where you have the development of Japanese Buddhist sects, never mind, until 1868, Buddhism and Shinto were not two different things. They were together. And the Buddhas and the kami were perceived as somehow different, but also like two sides on one single coin. The more important coin changed over time. Which one is important? Is like the real, is the Buddha or Bodhisattva the real thing and the kami is the representation, or is it the other way around? That changed over time, but this relationship was consistent throughout the whole history of Japan until 1868. What happens in 1868, that is the Meiji period, technically speaking, there is a law that divides kamis and Buddhas. They divide religious institutions. The reason for this law is that the new government wanted to create a system, a state system, centralized around the figure of the emperor and ancestor worship. So in order to do so, they got rid of what they considered Buddhism, spurious Buddhism, and they isolated what they considered pure Shintoism. This was completely invented, just so you know. So they created Shinto as one modern religion, which means with certain texts, a certain hierarchy, and a pyramid throughout the country. This state religion revolving around the figure of the emperor was purely created at the time. there were previous local cults, the systematic pyramid of one religion was intentionally created. At the same time, Buddhism started being depicted and represented as a foreign religion, even though it had been there for those 1,000 and some hundreds of years. And it got attacked by the general population. There were also more practical reasons. Let's skip those. This movement was called Haibutsu Kishaku, abolish Buddhism and destroy Shakyamuni here. And Buddhism was taken away, aside from the creation of the state based on this modern vision of Shinto as a state religion. Along with the creation of Shinto as a state religion, there is also the creation of the Japanese as a monolithic, monoethnic, monocultural nation. And this discourse became even stronger after World War II. Then another big rupture is 1947, when the Japanese Constitution was promulgated under American occupation, and the Japanese Constitution reduced the emperor to the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people, no longer a divine figure, and set the separation between state and religion, which creates issues like this. This is the so-called groundbreaking ritual, or Jichinsai in Japanese. It is a ritual which is usually very common, and it's usually carried out by, as you can see if you're a little bit familiar with Japanese religious institutions, by Shinto priests, mainly, not exclusively, but mainly Shinto priests. This, as you can see, is a whole Shinto paraphernalia with offerings to the gods, the kami here, shimenawa. It's all Shinto, and it's meant to open up the land by purificating them from evil spirits and pacifying the gods. It's simply to propitiate prosperity in that piece of land. And you do it before you start building something. It is very, very common. The problem here, why am I talking about this? Because in 1965, there was a very big case. Professor Colombo here, the moderator, wrote an article a long time ago. Because a city in Mie Prefecture sponsored a Jichinsai, this groundbreaking ritual, for the construction of a school gymnasium. Then a member of the Communist Party, a city official member of the Communist Party, brought suit against the mayor of the city, claiming that this, because the city paid a Shinto, for a Shinto ritual, so a Shinto institution, a religious institution, that was against the constitutional principle of separation of state and religion. But the Supreme Court in '77, so this went up to the Supreme Court, so it wasn't really, you know, we're not talking about something really, really light. It went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court declared that this groundbreaking ceremony was not a religious activity prohibited by the Constitution, insofar as they recognized the ritual as a religious ceremony. But since the religious significance of the groundbreaking ceremony to the average person had weakened over time, it was to be considered a ritual formality devoid of deep religious significance. And they set it as customary. The city didn't mean to promote any sort of religious messages or religious institutions. They were just carrying out a customary activity. So it is religion, but it's not that bad religion kind of thing that goes against the Constitution. It is custom, culture, tradition. They use kanshu. customs. Now, how can this be, given that there were political issues? Are there issues between perceived religion and custom or tradition? Is it a problem of word? So, for example, in Japanese, as many of you might know, the translation for the word religion is shukyo. The Japanese word for religion is shukyo. Shukyo is a word that basically was born, let's say promulgated, became used in the Meiji period as the translation of religion from English. So before, there were different words to indicate different practices. Hence, those different practices that were not conceptualized as belonging to one single big category religion in most of the cases. There are exceptions, but in most of the cases. So the fact that the word shukyo, religion, was created implied also the creation of a certain understanding of something that started as related to Christianity, basically, because religion in English comes from Christianity, and to modern religions. Now, just so you know, the stuff that I do research about, which tend to be in English, would be folk religion, is a different thing in Japanese. It is minkan shinko, not minkan shukyo. That is folk beliefs or folk cults or folk practices, whatever you want. But it's not minkan shukyo, because the word shukyo in Japanese has a very strong sense of institution. So whatever is fluid and less related to institutions is not perceived in Japanese as shukyo, even though, or maybe just exactly because, shukyo is the translation of religion, whereas in English you would call those practices folk religion. So already, even though it's a translation, there are already problems here. Reader, the guy I was mentioning before, suggests the idea that Japanese people tend to be practically religious. So that Japanese religiosity is more focused on belonging, affiliations, and doing the stuff that you have to do in practice, rather than actual belief. And this is what creates a little bit the problem with issues of, with conceptualizations of religion in Japan, because we are starting from the assumption that religion starts or needs, has to do with belief. That being said, the same reader in 2012 published an article, his last article before retiring, with that article over there, Secularization and LLP, nonsense, strongly claiming that Japan is undergoing a strong process of secularization. So national surveys have shown a consistent decline in religious belief, individual affiliation, and opinions on religion as important since the post-war. There is a strong distrust of religious institutions, figures, and leaders, especially since 1995, when the gas sarin attack by Aum Shinrikyo happened in the Tokyo metro. It's clear, there is a clear institutional decline, both for Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples. There is a decline in folk religious activities and practices. And there is even a word in Japanese that is estrangement from religion or Buddhism, that is shukyo banare or bukkyo banare. So this is a very clear and well understood phenomenon in Japanese society now. There are arguments that claim that spirituality actually is replacing religion. Spirituality defined as basically a more individualistic practice, non-institutionalized, individualized, non-organizational means of engaging in thoughts, practices, and activities that are, in effect, a postmodern form of religion, but without the connotations of organization and affiliation associated with religion. So everything that in the West is associated with New Age, in Japan is called spirituality, to put it very simply. There are arguments that these more individualistic practices are supplanting institutionalized practices, but there is little evidence for this argument, actually. It seems that many religious institutions are trying to rebrand themselves by using spirituality, but there is also little evidence that this is succeeding. Plus, where growth might occur in areas more commonly associated with religion, like pilgrimage, it may be because they are being increasingly disassociated in practical terms from any mention of religion itself. So pilgrimages, although originally are religious practices, and they are becoming more popular, but they are becoming more popular among people who are interested in hiking or in the environment, like myself. I do it, and I do it just because I also do the whole ritual part because I study religions. But one of the reasons why I go to the Shikoku pilgrimage, for example, for some days is because I like walking, and there is a wonderful natural environment. And it's nice, it's a very nice experience. But it's not that because of that, I believe in what is going on. I mean, in the religious aspects, even though I do chant the sutras, for example. Most people do not even do that. They just go and walk, or they simply go to the temples by bus and visit the temples, like you would do in Kyoto, for instance. Now, that being said, let's focus a little bit about generalized notions of what is going on with Japanese religions. All shrines and temples have their own yearly cycle or rituals, which is called Nenju-gyoji. These activities tend to be celebrated, can be celebrated at a national level. So, for example, New Year's Eve, Atsumode, or Obon, when the spirits of the dead come back. If I have time, I will talk about it a little bit more. And at the same time, locality or region-specific ones. Traditionally speaking, okay, from the temple's perspective, or the religious institution, the shrine's perspective, the yearly cycle of rites is connected with local means of production. So where you have an agriculture-based village, the rituals, the cycle would be connected to important moments in agriculture. Fishing villages would be important moments for fishing, and so on and so forth, and livelihood of the village community. Now, these are rituals that you find mainly related to Shinto shrines. Historically speaking, also Buddhist temples would contribute to that with rituals to exorcise insects and pests in the countryside. Plus, the role of Buddhism, historically speaking, has always been dealing with death, more or less depending on the periods. Now it is basically 100%. There are also secular funerals, which are becoming more and more relevant, actually. But religious-wise, Buddhism equals death and funerals. Of course, the move to an urban industrial economy has diminished the importance of community and calendrical festivals. And there is a decline of the traditional three-generational family, which with consequences on the relationship between Buddhism and the ancestors and the living. This is quite easy to understand. One thing that you could fairly commonly observe in Japan is this kind of thing. This is the typical happening during a festival. That is, you have a community, a village, or in this case, this is Kyoto, a bunch of neighborhoods with a shrine, a central shrine, and when the shrine once per year or twice per year has the Matsuri, the festival. What is happening here is that males in the community, traditionally speaking, bring around this palanquin which is called a mikoshi. The reason why this thing is heavy, this thing is in average more than 1 ton, sometimes 2 or 3 tons. This, if I remember correctly, was 1.5 tons. So you need a lot of people to carry it around. Inside that thing, there is the Goshintai, or the body of the god. The body of the god is an object that usually is inside a shrine, inside that specific shrine. So as you maybe you have noticed that when you go to shrines, you have different kinds of altars. And there is the big main hall, but you cannot see what's inside. You typically see a mirror, and then there are 2 doors which are closed behind the mirror. Inside those 2 doors, there is an object that nobody knows. Can actually be nothing, but it's typically a rock or a piece of paper, a talisman, it can be a picture, a mirror, whatever. That thing is ritually moved for the Matsuri. So that is the body of the god. It is not a representation of the god. It is the god's body. That thing is ritually moved from the altar to the palanquin, and then carried around those neighborhoods by males in the village. Quite typically, these guys are completely drunk. And they're drunk because of several reasons. 1, it's a festival. 2, that thing is heavy. Being drunk helps. I mean, it's heavy, it hurts, okay? I did it once, it hurts. Being drunk helps also with, with fatigue. 3, it is a way, traditionally speaking, it was a way that was perceived to be closer to an altered state of consciousness, because also sake, alcohol, is traditionally speaking associated to Shinto shrines and gods, because it's rice. And so, while drinking, you somehow incorporate the god, you get drunk. It is a not normal state because you're doing a not normal thing. And consequently, in order to get closer to the god and materially, literally close to the god, you have been in this state makes sense. Plus it helps because that thing is really heavy. More recently, you can find now mikoshi for women, for females, or the children mikoshi. But typically, traditionally speaking, it would be males of the community. Now, this is Kyoto. We have a highly aging population, and of course, even more in the countryside. Males have become able to carry that thing around, are becoming fewer and fewer. So what is going on in Kyoto and in Kansai in general is that temples have created a Matsuri-kai, a Matsuri community association, in which people who are interested in festivals enter. When there is a festival, any festival in the Kansai area, the Matsuri-kai calls the people who are interested, and they come, the ones who come, and they volunteer to bring the mikoshi around. So again, change, right? There is an institution who tries to keep that practice as it was with tradition and notions of tradition. But at the same time, what traditionally has been, was just the community, and it was quite exclusive actually, has become inclusive of people from different communities. So from a social perspective here, even though you have a ritual and a ritual aspect that tends to be conservative being a ritual, tend to keep the form, you have from a social perspective, the change into a way more inclusive practice than it used to be, say, in the post-war, because of social change. Okay, so it's important here to keep in mind social change, and that these practices change because societies change. Plus, we are talking about people who are interested in Matsuri from the whole Kansai area. If they did it only from the Kyoto area, for example, they wouldn't have many people, because there aren't many people who are interested in Matsuri and to carry the Mikoshi around, because the aforementioned secularization process, okay? These institutionalized practices, by the way, Shinto practices, by the way, tend to be, exactly because they have a very strong focus and emphasis on tradition, tend to have a slightly nationalistic smell in general, because Shinto shrines tend to emphasize tradition, and of course they are related to Shinto as a nation state as it used to be. So very often Shinto shrines and the central organization, the Jinja Honcho, that manages all Shinto shrines in Japan, has very strong connections with the LDP, with the right wing in Japan. Hence all the mess with Yasukuni Shrine and so on and so forth. But let's not talk about it. Of course, when we talk about festivals, we also talk about playful religiosity. The people who take part in the festival and who do not carry the Mikoshi, take part in the festival because it's fun, okay? It is a way, especially, this is not Kyoto, it's a village in the mountain where I do fieldwork. It is a way for people to enjoy themselves, to eat, drink together, to meet people, other people in their own community, and up to probably the 80s, I would say, it also used to be a way for males to meet females, a little bit like, you know, the mass was for people in Italy up to, I would say, the 60s. People would go to mass, also, yet the young people, also to meet people from the other sex, because it was a very good opportunity. And Matsuri, originally, traditionally speaking, was a very good opportunity when gender roles in Japanese societies, and especially in rural societies, rural villages, were extremely separate. So going to a Matsuri doesn't necessarily mean being religious, even though this is clearly a religious institution. You have, you know, lanterns with the shrine's name, you have a tori, you have rituals during the Matsuri, but most people who take part in this do it because it's something that you do, and because it's fun, and because, honestly speaking, if you live in a rural village in Japan, it's not that there is so much to do throughout the year. So it's one of the few big events which are there available to you in your own hometown. And it's simply nice. If you are familiar with any sort of anime set in even contemporary Japan, in rural villages, you probably know what I'm talking about, have an idea of what I'm talking about. So the idea is, there is this book about pilgrimage in the Edo period, which is called a pilgrimage in Japan, of course, which is called To Pray, Pay, and Play. And I think that this is a wonderful way to summarize not only pilgrimage, but how religious institutions and rituals and religiosity is lived and experienced in Japan. Consumption, exchange, playfulness, and you pray because you never know, or since we are here, sekkaku dakara. Is this animism? As you know, the Japanese have these gods, which are trees and stones, and they believe that there is a god inside them, right? So if you go to any shrine, you can find something like this. This is called the Shinboku, which is sacred or divine tree. Could be a rock, could be pretty much any natural element, even waterfalls. But typically you see the tree. Now, just so you know, first, the tree, it's not that they built a shrine and then they chose a tree to divinize. there was a big tree that was considered to be extremely powerful. Hence, they built a shrine. The shrine is there because of the tree, not the other way around. These sorts of ideas, that understandings of the natural environment as enlivened, animated by spirits, is called animism. That is, this is a definition, a textbook, literally textbook in anthropology definition. The belief that nature is animated, enlivened, or energized by distinct personalized spirits being separable from bodies. Now, this substrate of animism, as it's called often also in scholarship here in Japan, is also used to explain practices like this, because in Japan there are funerals for objects. Can you believe it? So especially certain objects, they do the funeral. So there is, traditionally speaking, a funeral for nails and needles, sorry, not nails. There is also the one for nails. And there are funerals for dolls. And you can, as you can see, they are still carried out because these are traditional dolls. These are quite modern contemporary dolls. Is this because they are animistic? Is Shinto a form of belief? Do they believe that dolls and needles have souls? An answer can be given through this. This is a funeral for Aibo, that is the Sony robots. As you can see from the newspaper title, in Japan, Aibo robots get their own funeral. Now, first, it is an extremely unique phenomenon. Second, it is so unique that it went on the newspaper. Third, it has been extremely well studied, including by a good friend of mine, anthropologist, who is American, Daniel White, if you want to check. Daniel White, and now he's here in Kyoto. Usually he's in Cambridge, before he was in Cambridge. He published a couple of articles about this. In one of his articles, he starts with, as an American, and he wrote the article with a Japanese person, a Japanese professor here at Doshisha, who is a very secular person, not particularly interested in religions. They asked the priest, so do you believe that Aibo have a soul? The answer by the priest was, Ahoka, are you stupid? So quite evidently there is something weird going on here. What is going on here is that owners of Aibo robots became somehow affectionate to the robot because it behaves like a pet. It's made to elicit attention. It calls you. It wants to be pet. It needs food, so it needs to be charged, and it calls you, and it grows over time. And this is how it's programmed. Okay, it is made to elicit affection and connections. Once, after years and years and years, this thing breaks and cannot be repaired anymore, it dies, and people started requesting a way to give that friend of theirs a goodbye. Quite simply, the priest was clever enough to propose a funerary ceremony that actually was very well accepted by the people. So, are these people animistic? No, if we listen to the priest, right? It's not a matter of belief. It is a matter of how we relate to objects and of how certain objects become more or less influential in our lives, and what kind of relationships we can have with certain objects, and of how those objects influence us and creates health our everyday lives. So is this usual weird Japan in which they have robot funerals? No, because this carrying out funerals for robots, it happens that even American soldiers in Iraq started doing it because they use robots and droids that save their lives, and they send them ahead to check if there are bombs, mines, or enemies. And sometimes there are. So that thing that has been with you up to that point is blown up. And people, soldiers, because out of gratefulness, because that thing saved your life, right? First. And second, it saved your life many times before. And you always used and relied on that thing. It's gone. They started celebrating funerals. This is American soldiers. It's not a simply Japanese way of doing things. It is something that it might be cross-cultural. And again, it tells us much more about how we can relate to objects than belief in itself, what we believe. Okay. Now, quickly, talking about these spirits which are part of everyday life and do not necessarily relate to issues of belief, but of practice, relations, and how people feel, basically. Let me give you a little bit quick overview of my old fieldwork periods in Kyoto, in this area here, which is called Rokuhara. And it's famous because of Obon. Obon being the period, traditionally, in which the spirits of the ancestors, well, actually the spirits of the dead, come back from the afterlife. Rokuhara is famous in Kyoto because there are a few temples, quite a few temples, that manage this coming back of the spirits of the dead. And there is this event, 7th to 10th of August, called Rokudo Mairi, which literally means visiting the 6 realms of rebirth according to Buddhism, which are starting from below: hell, hungry ghosts, animals, titans, humans, and heavens. And it consists of walking through the area, paying homage at the temples which are located in the area, and welcome the spirits of the dead by ritual means. What are these rituals? The first and most important temple among these, the whole temples, is Rokudo Chinnoji, which is this. This is the entrance. You can find a lot of representations of the afterlife. This is Emma, the Lord of the Afterlife and Judge of the Dead. You can see a lot of representations of Buddhist cosmology with a big bunch of hell, which is the biggest one. So where we are most likely to end up. The heavens, hungry ghosts, titans, and so on and so forth. Strong representations of death and decomposition. Candies to give to ghost children. And this ritual here, which consists in buying a koyamaki on the path within the precincts of the temple. So koyamaki is the name of this plant here. You bring it with you. Then you buy one tablet, one of these, I'll show you later, one tablet in which these monks write the posthumous name of the deceased that you want to welcome. You ring the bell, this very particular bell, which is said to be directly connected to hell and the afterlife underground. So you ring the bell and you call the spirit. You purify the tablet through incense. These are the tablets. You purify them through water with the branch of the plant that you bought. And of course, there are a lot of Jizo statues, Jizo being the deity, Buddhist deity connected to that. And then you bring the tablet, home. You literally bring the tablet home. And on the tablet, there is the spirit of the dead that you call. It's a very material thing. At the end of the period of Obon, on the 17th of August, there are rituals in which these tablets are burnt. And because the tablet gets burnt, and this is the famous Daimonji, this is what they burn during the Daimonji on the mountains. Because the tablets are burnt, the spirit goes away and is sent back to the afterlife. And the Obon period finishes by sending them away, also because you don't want constantly the spirits of the next to you, right? These are the very material objects which are used to for offering things to the ancestor. And this small ladder here is a ladder that you're supposed to put next to the suitobas, next to the tablet with the name of your ancestor, so that the spirit of the ancestor can climb down and go to the offerings on the altar. It's very, very, very material. And offerings which are typically food and are very personalized. They used to be standardized. They have become more individualized. So if somebody liked sake, you would offer sake or beer, of course, cigarettes, and so on and so forth. And food, obviously. So these sort of practices point at a very permeable border between this and the other world, a certain extent of materiality of spirits of the dead, and of course, ritual exchange. You offer things, and there is again this ritual exchange which also goes on in Shinto rituals with the gods, okay? And that also goes on in Japanese society in general, right? Because if you think about the whole practice of giving omiyage or gift giving, which is extremely widespread, even in secular life, you understand that these gift-giving practices and ritualized exchange is very, very important in Japanese everyday life. And it sets and builds relations also within the broader society, right? Hence, it also builds obligations and relations to repay with the gods and spirits of the dead. In all of this, these rituals have, according to the temple, roughly 100,000 practitioners a year. And they are seen by the people as traditional. Traditional, this has been going on forever. So you come here because it's been going on forever. This emphasis on tradition is something that you can find very strongly in Kyoto. But it is also something that you find in these discourses of the Japanese and Japaneseness as monoethnic, monocultural, and so on, in general. Now, MacDonald pointed out that certain practices are selected to symbolize traditional Japanese culture, and this supposedly homogeneous classic culture is presumed to be best preserved in the city, which played host to the imperial courts, Kyoto. This is very strong in Kyoto. It might be relatively strong in Japan in general, even though, of course, not all the Japanese are part of this discourse. There are a lot of very liberal Japanese people who do not buy into this sort of discourses. Also because they tend to be nationalists, right? But in this specific case, there is a Buddhist institution, there are Buddhist institutions, temples, which they base their own existence on insisting on that history of death and the afterlife, because the whole area was built for this specific purpose. When Kyoto was built as Heian, it was built only on the west side of the river. The east side of the river was the place and then this mountain here up in the north, were the places to throw corpses. They were literally hell. Corpses of human beings and animals were thrown there and left there. Obviously, you need people who manage these things, right? And hence, you have poor people at the time who start working there and start being involved in funerary practices. These people, over time, in the Middle Ages, became outcasts. And they were seen as polluted by death, because death was considered as polluting. This insistence on tradition and this kind of history produced this sort of problems in the area, because it was perceived as an outcast area, which is not. Let me be clear, it is not. It hasn't been related to any kind of death or funerals, more than any other places, for the past 250 years, not 30. Nevertheless, because the temples insist on their tradition and this history of their foundation and death and corpses there, people do not, they perceive it as a discriminated area, so they do not want to live there. So you have the highest population rate in Kyoto, highest aging rate, a lot of abandoned houses, owners of these houses were unknown, with consequent risks of fires, collapse, and so on and so forth. And a property value which was 50% compared to the surrounding areas. Now, if the abbot of the temple was aware of this, when I asked him, I was telling him, well, I know it used to be a discriminated area, but he was like, no, it's the same these days as well. And then he told me, nobody will tell you here because the community is trying to cancel the problem. But I talk to the people here. They come here to have some advice. So believe me, I know there are problems. Actually, it's not really a problem with the people. Discrimination problems are really few, but no one in Kyoto wants to enter the area to live here. So there are a lot of economic problems. Just so you know, discrimination, interpersonal discrimination, or marriage discrimination is extremely low now, even with outcast people, whatever it means, because it's very complicated. But there is an association, even they will tell you that interpersonal discrimination is extremely low, and it has been low since at least the 90s. The problem is that people do not want to mix with them in their area because they do not want to be perceived as outcasts themselves. So they avoid the areas. So you have economic issues in the areas, and Rokuhara, because it was imagined to be an outcast area, suffered from the same issues, but it's not an outcast area. What was going on was that a lot of people I interviewed connected it to these issues because of that history that was constantly told and retold by the temples. So people would tell me, it feels, I would feel uneasy in living in an area with so many corpses on the ground. It feels bad, it's creepy, and so on and so forth. So again, do they believe that there is something there? No, they feel uneasiness, they feel that specific area, because of that history, might be dangerous. Is this pollution? It's kind of difficult to say, but there is historical change. There is a lot of stuff which is imagined, but mainly these people, the people who go there, feel that it's a different area because of how it is represented by the temples in the area. So again, a lot of practice, a lot of rituality, a lot of how can I say, a lot of talking about tradition and going against difference. So we'll skip this. So what I'm trying to say here is that in order to understand Japanese religions, maybe it is better to focus on practice, affiliation, ritualization of social life, rather than belief, to understand Japanese religiosity, whatever it means. We can see that there is a progressive secularization of practices, like the uncommodification of practices. There is touristification, which I could not talk about. There are historical notions such as pollution that are not unchanged, nor do they, permeate society. When they are in action, they need to be understood as entangled in broader discourses of tradition and Japaneseness. Discourses of the Japanese as homogeneous are more connected to conservative tradition, conservative nationalist views, than to the actual state of society. So there are minorities, there are foreigners, there are Zainichi, Koreans, and so on and so forth. The media has played a major role in the promotion or condemning certain practices, religious practices rather than others, which in turn, in the case they promote practices, contributes to the remaking of certain localities, so city development, like in Rokuhara, gentrification, repopulation, internal migrations, and or alternative or spiritual communities. Recently, I started seeing connections between discourses of spirituality, people defining themselves as spiritual, but actually, and an idealized ancient Shinto, so non-institutionalized Shinto, cult of nature, with environmentalism and what in the West, or at least in Italy, I would simply call alternative, liberal, literary counterculture lifestyles. This is a new connection that I started seeing like in the past 5-6 years, but I cannot find anything about it. I will leave you with this. There would be tons of other things to talk about. The media-driven occult booms, so booms of occult practices that monsters used to revitalize practices, certain areas which, historically speaking, relate to discriminations, but now with the commodification of monsters, they are used to revitalize. This is like next to my neighborhood, but I will finish here. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm 3 minutes late. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea, for your very engaging, at the same time, very clear and easy to follow presentation. I would have, of course, many questions and comments, but I prefer to open that for discussion. Yes, it would be great if you could use your raise hand function or type your question in the chat box. I already see a raised hand, so Gabriele Trovato, please, if you could ask your question. You need to unmute yourself, of course.
Okay. Well, it was really a great talk, and thank you so much. And it was really a pleasure to see, actually, to know about you, because I think I have a lot of things that potentially you could be interested to discuss. One, I want to show you right now here. You see this?
Not really. I mean, I see that there is something, but now, okay.
Can you see?
Okay.
This is a 3D printed. I made it. I designed it and made it myself. 3D printed Kamidana and a 3D printed Omamori. And so I'm using robots for designing a special, like specific design of robot inspired to religion, to let's say to bring support, like cognitive support and company to the elderlies of Japan as well as Europe. And in case of Japan, of course, so I'm facing with the problems you are mentioning of different concept of religion. I realized a lot while interviewing people, asking you, do you have any religion? No, Shukyo nai. And then turns out that they go to Hatsumode and they go to this and to that. So there's really a lot. I have a few questions. One thing I would like to invite you, I see you're in Kyoto.
Yeah.
I would really like if you could, the next time you come to Tokyo, if I could know if we could be in contact, and invite you to visit here in Shibaura Institute of Technology.
Okay.
And I would like to show you the Dharma robot and all the stuff we are doing, and discuss about the contents also of this, what the robot is talking about. And it's talking about, for example, okay, I forgot the word. Anyway, all kind of those folklore content, and omikuji also, producing omikuji as well. One question that I have, it's actually made of two questions. One is that after doing some session of experiment, I realized that unfortunately, the target age that I was expecting of this kind of robot for support of elderlies that I was expecting to be seems to be shifted, because while interviewing like 70 years old people, which are supposedly third age, actually they are quite young in a certain sense. They said, well, these kind of things like Kamidana and so on, they will be good for my mother. So their parents, which are like 85, something like that, that generation, they are grown up with having in their house the altar and that kind of stuff. But seems that the 65, 70, they are now actually the baby boomers. And so I don't know if eventually in 15, 20 years, as they get older and closer, let's say closer to death, they will become at some point more interested in these things, more religious, or is not going to happen? Is it a generational gap, or is it just a matter of age? This is one question, number one. Number two, since probably in my view is it might be generation gap, and then since you mentioned the difference between religion and spirituality, and a decline of religion, and is spirituality going to decline as well? Because from a producer of these things, of these tools, I feel like that my target users are kind of dying out. I hope it, so I need to take some action in order to adapt to this trend.
Okay, thank you for your questions. Given that, obviously, I cannot make exact predictions. One thing that I can tell you is that this generational, how can I say, the growing interest towards religion in relation to aging has always been there. I would tend to think that the people who are now in the 70s might become a little bit more interested in some years, but at the same time, because of that general declining of general interest in religious practices, in this sense, I would expect those people who get interested into religious practices with aging to be fewer than those in the previous generation. So as for spirituality, it really depends on how you define it. So, for example, the power stones, for instance, healing with power stones, that isn't particular, that sort of new age spirituality isn't particularly influential anymore. At the same time, however, I also see a lot of people, and especially young people, who are interested in not just in spirits in general, but also, for example, spiritual healing and this idea of alternative lifestyles. because here in Japan, like I was told, that I consider myself a fricchettone in Italian. I tend to be, you know, very liberal, environmentalist. I like going around the mountains. I like seaside. I like nature. I'm not a hippie at all, but I tend to be the kind of what in English would define alternative, counterculture, and so on and so forth. People I know in Japan define me as spiritual, but I never talked about spirituality, or see what I mean? So there is really an overlapping of those that conceptualization of alternativity that I might have from Italy or Europe, I would say, and spirituality in Japan. So in certain cases, like you have alternative lifestyles and migration, looking for alternative lifestyles, young people who move to the countryside and remote places in the countryside, and they only want that specific lifestyle, living with nature. And they go and because they are good at surfing, they create a surfing community in Kochi, which exists. I went. Because they're interested in a certain kind of agriculture, they go to Shikoku. And they don't talk about spirituality, not necessarily. Once they get engaged in Shikoku with agriculture, then they also get engaged with the shrine and the Matsuri and so on. So they get a little bit more interested in this Shinto idea, which is not spirituality. It is this idealized idea of we Japanese are inherently Shinto, which is bullshit. And Shinto is this environmentalism and respect, love of nature, which is not necessary. But I have this sense that it's going in this direction. And if you go to Okinawa, for example, you find, I work with these people, I know a lot of traditional healers, who define themselves spiritual or traditional healers. They moved to Okinawa because of this, and they are interested, they openly talk about spirituality in the New Age sense. So it's very different. But what I can see is that there is this connection between alternativity or alternative lifestyles and this sort of non-institutionalized ideas of Shinto as connected to nature and or spirituality that overlap. That, I think, is sort of increasing.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Again, like you can either type in or raise your hand. Yes. I see Tom Blackfoot as, yes, please.
Yeah, thanks. One of my students actually has a question. I'm going to call him up here to the front. Arthur is an exchange student from Moldova here. Hello?
Hello.
Do you hear me?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question of something that I thought is pretty unique to Japan. So why fictionalized, comical, or even sexualized depictions of Shinto and Buddhist gods in like anime or manga is okay in Japan? Like, it's not blasphemy. So can you like explain why there's all this idea of blasphemous things? Thank you.
That's a great question.
Because it sells, and right, and religious institutions. I mean, first of all, sexuality has never been a big deal from a religious perspective in Japan. So, I mean, the idea of blasphemy in relation to sexuality is not particular, has even historically, has never been particularly relevant, or the other way around, actually. Especially certain kami, which were related to certain Buddhist deities, were very deeply intertwined with sexuality and fertility. So they were sterilized in a way, literally sterilized in with modernity and especially in the post-war. So the idea that sexuality might be offensive to the gods is not necessarily there. Then consider that you are talking about certain anime representations which are not being watched by the old Shinto priests who might, oh, these youngsters, right? That doesn't happen. So there is a free market, and things which are happening without the institutions knowing, in this sense. On the other way around, there are also certain Buddhist temples that, in order to attract young people, have started promoting themselves with anime and manga, which tend to be sexualized. And in certain cases, they're not porn, but they are extremely sexualized, so big breasts, visible big breasts, and so on. And that would be the bodhisattva, you know. And it's fine because they are independent, right? They can't decide what they want to do, the temple. In most cases, they can't decide what they want to do. So maybe other temples disagree, and they do actually, because they talk with other temples. And there is one case specifically in Kyoto that I'm thinking about. I heard other monks from other temples saying that, no, that's not a nice way. I understand that you need money, but that's a bit over the line. But I mean, they are free to decide, and apparently, in their view, that is supposed to attract new people. And consider that religious institutions, especially, are desperate. I mean, they really need money. Jinja, Shinto shrines might get some governmental funds, but they don't get so much. Buddhist temples don't. So they live on offerings, and especially Buddhist temples are desperate, like literally desperate. They would do anything to. I was offered to become a monk. Okay, I was offered to marry into a mountain village to carry the Mikoshi. Okay, just to give you an idea. So yeah, there is a very strong economic push factor, and at the same time that in general they're not perceived to be particularly blasphemous.
Thank you.
Whatever. No problem.
Thank you. I'm picking up a question from the chat from Evelyn Reuter. Is if Shintoism is not institutionalized, how one can become a Shinto priest?
Shintoism is institutionalized. There are, I mean, Shintoism now is Chinese. So, and there is a whole pyramid with Jinja Honcho at the top. So it is extremely institutionalized. What I was talking about is these people, these sort of alternative people who see themselves in relation to ideas of an idealized Shinto, like ancient Shinto. This is how they call it, Kodai Shinto or animism. These are the two words that they use, that they relate to environmentalism and senses of nature and so on. And that, how they see that sort of thought is not institutionalized. It's not the institutionalized Shinto. But Shinto now is institutionalized. It's a religious institution.
And you have to study to become a Shinto priest, right?
Sure. Yeah, you have to study. You study to become. And in certain cases, you also do shugyo training, physical training.
I see another raised hand from Tom Blackwood. I guess somebody else has a question there.
I have Javi. Javi is from the United States, and she has a question, so I'm going to let her have my seat again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to speak, for allowing us to come here to speak.
Yeah, pleasure.
My question was actually related to a piece that we were assigned to read in regards to Japanese religions. And there was a part about it mentioning, in one of the readings, it was mentioning that there was a point in time that Shintoism wasn't considered religion, but more so a science. So could you offer some insight into why you think or how it shifted into being, categorized as a religion? If that makes sense.
More so a science. What do you mean?
So there's a specific quote from
Well, it was not a statement. Yes, Joy Law.
yeah. So it says, Josephson lays out, this is just the quote from the piece, but it says Josephson lays out the first part of his account of how Shinto came to be understood as a non-religion in Meiji era governmental policy. He argues that Shinto was not, as has commonly been assumed, a religion that was reconfigured as a political system. Rather, Shinto was molded in the hands of Kokugaku scholars to operate as a comprehensive science. So, yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
So it wasn't, that doesn't mean, it was molded by scholars of Kokugaku, you know what it means, right? So scholars of Japanese stuff that molded those sparse beliefs, and they created first of all, something consistent, a system of knowledge. And a system of knowledge related to agricultural knowledge. So not just a spiritual kind of knowledge as one could imagine a religion, but something that is embedded in everyday life and knowledge for cultivation, for fishing, and so on. And this sort of knowledge was scattered. Kokugaku started pulling certain texts together, looking for an origin of things, Kokugakusha. And they started not really creating, but well, in a way, yes, they put them together into one single system that also was related to agricultural knowledge, for example. I think that this is what they mean by science.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I guess we have time for one other questions, if there is any. Yes.
If there are no other questions, I have one more student who has a question.
Well, it's nice to see how engaged your students are. I really appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. This is Michael. Go, come on.
Hello. Yeah, this is Michael, whoever that is. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Antoni. I really appreciated it, and I think I can speak for everyone here that it's something that I think a lot of young people don't think about a lot in terms like religion in general, and I think the presentation offered a very good gateway into understanding religion in Japan specifically. So thank you very much for that. My question is actually kind of a smaller question. Honestly, I was curious about one of the informations in your slides. You were talking a little bit about animism and a little bit about the spiritual, the effect that inanimate objects and animals have on people and on their spirits. You showed pictures of the plushes, the funerals for the plushes and the funerals for those Aibo, I forgot the name of them, but those robots. What did they do with them after the funerals were over?
What did they do? What
They bury them? Do they bury them? Do they dispose? What, I'm not sure what, because you have to be because you're trying to be respectful of them since it's a funeral. So I'm not exactly sure. Again, this is a small question. I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Dolls are burned.
Burned?
Yeah, they're burned.
Okay.
So they are cremated.
Right.
Aibo are not, because too precious. So they framed the whole thing as organ transplants. And they really use the word, the expression, organ transplant.
I see.
See
Would
what I mean?
that kind of be like recycling?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you so much for the answer. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Yes.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you to everybody for the questions and the contribution to the debate. As you know, as Italian peoples are very famous for like keeping time, and since it's 6:30, I guess we can call it a day. And I am really grateful for I would like to express my gratitude to Marco and the RJ for organizing this event and for giving me the pleasure and responsibility to chair it. And of course, our gratitude goes to Andrea for this, again, very, it's not because you're a good friend, but I think you really managed the very, very delicate task to give something introductory that could be followed by everybody, but at the same time, scientifically accurate and spot on, and shedding a light on many misunderstandings about Japan. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
That's all for today.
Yes.
Thank you.
Giorgio, I just want to give a couple of announcements. So the talk of Andrea will be uploaded on our YouTube page. So if you want to check again some details that maybe you missed, you can find it there. And then I want to say that we will have a similar talk exactly 1 month from now on November 29th about Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the bombs and the legacy on the society, that will be given by Professor Marco Zappa from the University of Ca' Foscari from Venice. So you will receive the information, the members of RJ and also from the SSJ forum. So please join the next event as well. Thank you very much.
Can we have Andrea's email?
Sure, Andrea, it was on the slide, and you just type Andrea De Antoni, University of Kyoto.
Yeah,
can
by
you
the
type
way,
it on in the chat?
And it's also on our, just visit our website, we have in the news. Okay, but yeah, please write in the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Giorgio. Grazie.
Anyway, if you browse me, if you Google me, I'm all over the internet. I'm like
Okay, perfect.
virus.
And also special thanks to the students of Tom Blackwood. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good day.
We really appreciate it. We all appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.